I was standing in Ethan's kitchen, the one I'd come to know as well as my own, chopping carrots for a stew the kids loved. The knife moved in a steady rhythm, the soft thunk against the cutting board, blending with the giggles of Amelia and Jacob playing in the living room. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the world feels soft and familiar, like a favorite sweater. I was humming an old lullaby, the one I used to sing to Ethan when he was small, when he walked in. My son, my only child, the boy I'd raised through sleepless nights and scraped knees, through a divorce that left us both raw, through years of pinching pennies to make sure he had what he needed. Mom, he said, his voice flat, not looking up from his phone. We've been thinking, you're getting too old to keep up with the kids. We need someone younger, someone who can handle them better. The knife stopped mid-chop. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest. I looked at him, waiting for a glance, a softening, anything to show he knew what he'd just said. But Ethan kept scrolling, his thumb flicking across the screen like he hadn't just carved a hole in my heart. Amelia's laughter floated in from the next room, bright and oblivious, and I clung to it like a lifeline. Too old, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, he said, finally, looking up, but not at me. His eyes landed somewhere, near the counter, where the carrots lay half sliced. It's not a big deal, Mom. Just, the kids are a lot. We're thinking of hiring someone with more energy. Lydia agrees. Lydia, my daughter-in-law, the woman who used to hug me and call me a godsend when I'd stay up late with Jacob during his teething nights. I nodded, because what else could I do? I'd spent 62 years learning how to nod, how to swallow the hurt, how to keep the peace. I understand, I said, though I didn't, not really. Not when every fiber of me wanted to scream, I'm still here. I'm still your mother. I'm still enough. I turned back to the carrots, picked up the knife, and started chopping again, slower this time. The rhythm was gone. Ethan mumbled something about work and left the kitchen, his footsteps fading down the hall. I stood there, the stew simmering on the stove, the kids' laughter growing fainter, and felt something inside me crack. Not a loud break, not a sob or a shout, but a quiet fracture, like a hairline split in a piece of glass. You don't notice it at first, but you know it's only a matter of time before it shatters. Thought looking back, that moment was the beginning, the first step on a path I never imagined I'd take. I didn't know then that I'd soon be packing my bags, leaving behind the life I'd built around my son and his family. I didn't know I'd find a forgotten lottery ticket that would change everything, and I certainly didn't know that one day Ethan would reach out, desperate to reconnect, only to find me living a life he could no longer touch. But standing there, with the weight of his words sinking into my bones, I knew something had to change, because when the person you love most in the world tells you you're no longer needed, well, that's a wound that doesn't heal on its own. I wiped my hands on the dish towel, the one with little blue sailboats that Amelia loved to trace with her fingers. I looked around the kitchen there, not my Nand, felt like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. I'd moved into their spare room 2 years ago, after George, my husband, passed away from a stroke. Ethan had insisted, "We want you close, Mom," he'd said, his arm around my shoulders. "The kids need their grandma. And honestly, you're helping us out so much." I'd believed him. I'd sold my little house, packed up my life, and settled into their world, thinking I was part of it, thinking I belonged. But belonging, I was starting to learn, is a fragile thing. It can slip away when you're not looking, eroded by a glance, a tone, a single sentence, too old to keep up. As if my years of love, of patience, of showing up day after day, could be measured by how fast I could chase a toddler. As if 62 was an expiration date stamped across my forehead. I finished the stew, set the table, and called the kids to eat. Ethan and Lydia came down, talking about work, barely glancing at the food I'd spent hours preparing. Amelia climbed into my lap, her small hands tugging at my necklace, and whispered, "Grandma, you make the best dinner." Her words were a bomb, but they couldn't erase the sting of Ethan's. I smiled at her, kissed her forehead, and told myself it was enough. For now, it had to be. But that night, lying in the narrow bed in my room, the one with the creaky springs and the faded quilt George and I had bought on our honeymoon, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I stared at the ceiling, replaying Ethan's words, his indifference, the way he'd dismissed me without a second thought. And somewhere in that sleepless dark, a question, took root, small, but insistent. Am I more than this? I used to think love was enough to hold a family together. That if you showed up, day after day, with a full heart and willing hands, you'd always have a place. I believed that because I'd poured everything into Ethan, every late-night math homework session, every scraped-together dollar for his college books, every tear I dried when his father left us, and after George, my rock, passed away, I thought moving into Ethan's home would stitch us even closer. A new chapter, I told myself. A chance to be the grandmother Amelia and Jacob deserved, to be the mother Ethan still needed. I was wrong. The first year in their house, out in the Chicago suburbs, was like a warm dream. I'd wake up early, before the sun crept over the rooftops, and tiptoe to the kitchen to brew my chamomile tea. The house was quiet then, just the soft creak of the floorboards and the hum of the fridge. I'd pack Jacob's lunch peanut butter sandwiches cut into star shapes, because he said they tasted better that way. I'd braid Amelia's hair before preschool, her tiny hands clutching a stuffed bunny as she chattered about her dreams. Ethan would come downstairs, kiss my cheek, and say, "You're a lifesaver, Mom." Lydia would smile, her eyes tired from late nights at her marketing job, and whisper, "We'd be lost without you." I felt needed. I felt whole. Those moments, they carried me through the grief of losing George. His stroke had come out of nowhere, stealing him in the night like a thief. I'd sold our little house, the one with the porch swing where we'd watched fireflies, because I couldn't bear the silence of it alone. Ethan had opened his door, and I walked through it, thinking I was building something new, something lasting. I was wrong about that. It started with small things, so small I barely noticed at first. Ethan stopped kissing my cheek in the mornings. He'd grab his coffee, mutter a thanks, and rush out the door. Lydia's smiles became hurried, her gratitude replaced by quick texts. "Can you grab Amelia at 4TX? I didn't mind. I'd been a single mom once, juggling lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences while Ethan did his homework at the kitchen table. I knew what it was to be stretched thin, so I picked up the slack driving Jacob to soccer, soothing Amelia's fevers, scrubbing dishes until my hands were raw. I told myself, this is love. This is family. But love, I learned, can be a one-way street. One evening, I was reading to Amelia in her room, her favorite book about a mouse who builds a boat. Her head was tucked against my shoulder, her breath warm and steady. I was halfway through the page when Lydia poked her head in. "Vivian," she said, her voice sharp, "you let Amelia skip her nap again. We're trying to keep her on a schedule." "She was fussy," I said softly, "so I thought a story might calm her down." Lydia sighed, the kind of sigh that carries a whole conversation in it. "We've talked about this. You can't just do things your way. It messes everything up." She turned and left, not waiting for a reply. I sat there, the book still open, Amelia's eyes heavy with sleep, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet ache, like a bruise you don't notice until you press it. The ache grew with every passing week. Ethan started texting instructions instead of talking. "Mom, don't forget Jacob's cleats. Mom, can you make dinner tonight?" "Something quick," I'd reply with a heart emoji, hoping it might spark a conversation, but it never did. Then came the nanny. Her name was Sarah, young and cheerful, with a ponytail that bounced when she walked. I came home one afternoon to find her playing blocks with Jacob on the living room rug. "Oh, Vivian," Lydia said, breezing down the stairs, "I forgot to tell you. Sarah's helping out a few days a week. It'll give you a break." A break. I hadn't asked for one. I didn't want one. I wanted to be the one building block towers with Jacob, singing Amelia to sleep. I offered to show Sarah the kids' routines, Amelia's favorite blanket, Jacob's fear of thunderstorms, but Lydia waved me off. "She's a professional, Vivian. She's got it." I smiled, nodded, and went to my room, where the walls seemed to close in just a little tighter. After that, I started to fade. Not all at once, but in pieces. The kitchen calendar, where I used to jot down Jacob's soccer games and Amelia's art classes, was replaced by a sleek app on Lydia's phone. "It's easier this way," Ethan said, not looking up from his laptop. I asked to learn the app, to stay in the loop, but he shrugged. "We've got it covered, Mom." Covered, like I was a task to be checked off a list. The kids still brought me joy. Those fleeting moments when Jacob would run to me with a drawing, or Amelia would beg for one more story. But even that began to slip. One Saturday, Lydia hosted a barbecue for her work friends. I'd spent the morning baking cookies, the ones with sprinkles that Jacob loved. I carried a tray out to the backyard, where people in crisp polos and sundresses sipped iced tea and laughed. I was about to set the tray down when Ethan called out, his voice carrying over the chatter. Mom's still stuck in the 80s with her baking. Guess we can't all keep up with the times. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it cut just the same. A few people glanced my way, their smiles polite, pitying. I set the tray down, my hands trembling, and walked back. Inside, I stood at the sink, gripping the edge, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears. I wasn't angry. I was humiliated. And worse, I was starting to believe him. Maybe I was stuck in the past. Maybe I was too old to belong here. The final blow came a few weeks later. It was a Sunday, and I'd spent the day helping Amelia with a school project, a poster about her favorite animal, a giraffe. We'd glued yarn for its mane, laughing as glitter stuck to our fingers. Ethan came home, glanced at the mess on the dining table, and frowned. Mom, you've got to stop doing this old school stuff. It confuses the kids. They need structure, not crafts. His voice wasn't loud, but it was final. Like he was closing a door I hadn't realized was still open. That night, I overheard him talking to Lydia in the kitchen. I was in the hallway, folding Jacob's soccer jersey, when his voice drifted out. She tries, Lyd, but she's slowing down. I mean, she's 62. We might need to think about other options. Someone more capable. The word lodged in my chest like a stone. Not loving, not dedicated, just capable. Like I was a machine that had started to rust. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. Not then. I folded the jersey, placed it on the counter, and went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a photo on the nightstand. Me, Ethan, and George at Ethan's high school graduation. We were smiling, arms around each other, a family. I barely recognized that woman now, the one who thought love was enough, the one who thought she'd always have a place. The next morning, Ethan and Lydia sat me down. Mom, Ethan said, his voice too bright, like he was selling me something. We've been thinking. It might be good for you to have your own space again. Somewhere quiet, independent. There's a nice retirement community nearby. They've got game nights, book clubs. He trailed off, as if the promise of bingo could replace the sound of Amelia's laughter, or Jacob's footsteps running to me. I nodded, because that's what I did. Sure, I said, my voice steady. That sounds fine. Ethan looked relieved, like he'd expected a fight. Lydia smiled, a tight, polite smile. We'll help you move, she said. No rush. Maybe by next month. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the backyard. The swing set I'd helped Ethan assemble was still there, the one Jacob loved. I'd pushed him on it just last week, his giggles filling the air. Next month is fine, I said, and something inside me closed off, like a window shuttered. Against a storm. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was grieving. Grieving a role I'd thought was mine forever. Grieving the son who used to look at me like I was his whole world. Grieving the woman I used to be, the one who believed family meant permanence. But grief, I was starting to learn, can be a quiet thing, and sometimes, it's the quiet that pushes you to change. The apartment was small, tucked above a corner deli in a tired part of Chicago, where the streets smelled of fried onions and exhaust. The walls were thin, the kind that let you hear your neighbor's TV through the night, and the radiator hissed like it was arguing with itself. I'd signed the lease a week after Ethan suggested I move out, telling myself it was temporary, just a place to land until I figured things out. But as I sat on the lumpy couch that first night, still in my coat, staring at a crack in the plaster wall, I realized I hadn't just left Ethan's house. I'd left behind the woman I thought I was. I was 62 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, a mother, a grandmother, a widow. For years, those labels had defined me, given me purpose. I'd spent decades shaping young minds, teaching kids to read, to dream, to be kind. I'd raised Ethan through a divorce that left us both bruised, cheering at his soccer games, saving for his college fund even when it meant skipping my own small luxuries. After George died, I'd poured myself into Amelia and Jacob, their laughter filling the holes his absence left. But now, in this dim apartment with its flickering fluorescent light, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Not a mother, not really, not when my son had pushed me out. Not a grandmother, not when I was deemed too old to keep up. Just Vivian. And I didn't know what that meant. I tried to build a routine, because that's what I'd always done. I'd wake at dawn, make coffee in a chipped mug, and walk to the corner store for groceries I didn't need. I'd linger in the aisles, reading cereal box labels, watching families shop together, mothers laughing with their kids, husbands debating pasta brands. No one noticed me. Once, a cashier called me ma'am without looking up. Another time, a man reached past me for a loaf of bread, not even muttering an excuse me. It was like I'd become a ghost, still here but invisible, my edges blurred against the world. I missed the kids most of all. Jacob's gap-toothed grin when I'd sneak him an extra cookie. Amelia's small hand slipping into mine, asking for just one more story, Grandma. I'd close my eyes and hear their voices, see their faces, and for a moment, I could pretend I was still part of their world. But then I'd open my eyes to the empty apartment, the silence pressing in, and the truth would settle back over me. Like dust, I wasn't part of their world anymore. Not the way I'd hoped. I called Ethan once, about a week after I moved. My hands shook as I dialed, the phone cold against my ear. I left a voicemail, my voice too bright, too careful. Hi Ethan, just checking in. How are the kids? I miss them. Let me know if you all want to visit. I waited for a reply, checking my phone every hour, then every day. Nothing came. Not a call, not a text, not even a "we're busy mom," just silence. And that silence, it was heavier than Ethan's words in the kitchen, heavier than Lydia's sighs or the laughter at the barbecue. It was the kind of silence that makes you question everything. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, a wobbly thing I'd found at a thrift store, and cried. Not a soft cry, not the kind you can wipe away and move on from. This was deep, guttural, the kind that leaves you gasping, your whole body shaking with the weight of it. I cried for the kids I couldn't see, for the son who didn't seem to care, for George who'd promised we'd grow old together but left me to face this alone. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who stood in front of a classroom, commanding attention with a smile, the one who danced with George under the stars, the one who thought love would always be enough. I looked around the apartment, at the boxers I hadn't unpacked, at the photo albums stacked in the corner. I pulled one out, my fingers tracing the faded cover. Inside were pictures of a life that felt like someone else's now. My wedding day with George, his arm around me, both of us laughing in a way that felt invincible. Ethan at 5, holding a crayon drawing of our family, his smile so big it took up half the page. Me, with Amelia and Jacob, building a set at the lake, their tiny hands sticky with sunscreen. I stared at those pictures until my eyes burned, wondering where that woman had gone. Had I been too much, too present, not enough? Had I failed as a mother, or had I simply been outgrown? That was my lowest point. Sitting there, alone, with a cold cup of coffee and a photo album full of memories that felt like lies. I was mourning more than my place in Ethan's home. I was mourning the version of myself I'd spent years building, the teacher, the mother, the grandmother who thought she mattered. I was mourning the illusion that family meant forever. And in that dark, hollow moment, I realized no one was coming to save me. Not Ethan, not the kids, not George, whose absence still felt like a missing piece of my soul. It was just me now, staring at a life I didn't recognize. But sometimes, it's in the breaking that you find the first hint of strength. I didn't see it then, not fully. But as I closed the photo album and set it aside, a small, stubborn thought flickered in the back of my mind. If no one's coming to pull me out of this, maybe I have to do it myself. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just a spark, faint but persistent, like the first star in a twilight sky. And that spark, though I didn't know it, was about to change everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and unremarkable, the kind of day that slips past without leaving a mark. The apartment was cold, the radiator clanking half-heartedly, and I had nothing to do but face the boxers I'd been avoiding since the move. They sat in the corner, a silent reminder of the life I'd left behind at Ethan's house. I'd unpacked the essentials, dishes, clothes, a few books, but the rest felt too heavy. Like opening them would mean admitting this was permanent. This dim, lonely place above the deli, with its peeling wallpaper and the faint smell of grease, was my home now, or at least, it was where I existed. I pulled the box toward me, labeled George in my own careful handwriting. I hadn't touched it since packing it up after his funeral 2 years ago. My fingers hesitated over the tape, then tore it open, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Inside were pieces of him, of us. A stack of birthday cards he'd written me, his slanted script promising forever, a pressed rose from our 25th anniversary dinner, brittle but still faintly red, a Polaroid from a road trip to the Wisconsin Dells, both of us sunburned and laughing, young in a way I'd forgotten we'd ever been. I held that photo for a long time, tracing George's smile, wishing I could step back into that moment, wishing he was here to tell me what to do next. Beneath the photo was an envelope, thick and worn, its edges curling. My handwriting on the corner read, "Keep, check later." I frowned, not remembering what it held. I peeled it open, and a jumble of papers spilled out: old receipts, a grocery list in George's scrawl, a ticket stub from a Cubs game we'd gone to with Ethan, and then, tucked among them, a lottery ticket, creased and faded, the kind George used to buy every month as a joke. "Our retirement plan," he'd say, waving it like a magic wand. "One day, Viv, we'll be sipping wine in France, living like royalty." I'd laugh, roll my eyes, and tell him I'd settle for a new coffee maker. I almost tossed it aside. It was just a relic, another piece of a life that didn't exist anymore. But something stopped me, maybe boredom, maybe a flicker of curiosity, maybe just the need to feel close to George again. I pulled out my phone and Googled the numbers. Powerball, March 12th, 3 years ago. The screen loaded slowly, the numbers appearing one by one: 14, 29, 33, 47, 60. Powerball 9. I glanced at the ticket, then back at the screen. My heart gave a strange lurch. I read them again, then a third time, my breath catching in my throat. The numbers matched, every single one. I sat back on the floor, the ticket trembling in my hand. This couldn't be right. I checked the date, the year, the lottery website again, convinced I'd misread something, but there it was, clear as day, a winning ticket worth $4.2 million, unclaimed, with less than 2 weeks before it expired. My mind spun, a dizzying mix of disbelief and something else, something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I stood, pacing the small room, the ticket still clutched in my hand. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped it. Was this real? Was George, somehow, reaching out from wherever he was, giving me one last gift? I laughed, a short, shaky sound that echoed in the empty apartment. It felt absurd, like I'd slipped into a dream. But the ticket was solid, the numbers undeniable. I called the lottery office, my voice barely steady. The line was busy. I called again. A woman answered, her tone calm, professional. "Yes, ma'am, if you're the ticket holder, bring it to our downtown office with valid ID. It's still active, but you'll need to move quickly." I whispered, "Thank you," and hung up. Then I sat on the couch, the phone slipping from my hand, and cried. Not the wrenching sobs of that night at the kitchen table, not the grief of losing Ethan's love, or the kids' laughter. These were different tears: relief, awe, a kind of quiet wonder. It wasn't just the money. It was what it meant. For the first time in a long time, I saw a way out, not just from this apartment, not just from the loneliness, but from the version of myself I'd become, the woman who nodded, who faded, who believed she was done. The ticket wasn't a rescue, it was a door, a chance to choose something new, something mine. I looked around the apartment, at the boxers, the cracked walls, the life I'd been shrinking into, and I realized I didn't have to stay here. I didn't have to wait for Ethan to call, for Lydia to thank me, for the kids to need me. I could build something else, something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The thought was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the wind on your face. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, the ticket tucked safely in a plastic sleeve beside me. I started writing, not a to-do list or a grocery list, but a list for me. For Vivian, places George and I had dreamed of, the lavender fields of Provence, the canals of Amsterdam, the cliffs of Ireland, things I'd always wanted to do. Learn to make pottery, write a story, sit in a cafe, and watch the world go by. And at the bottom, in small, careful letters, I wrote, "Stop waiting to be enough." It was a small act, that list, but it felt like the first step toward something bigger, something alive. The ticket wasn't just money. It was a mirror, showing me a woman I'd buried under years of giving, of serving, of putting everyone else first. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to know her again. The morning after I confirmed the lottery ticket, I woke before dawn, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a pull, a quiet excitement, like a child on the first day of school. I made coffee, not the instant kind I'd settled for in that dingy apartment, but real coffee, ground fresh, its aroma filling the air. I wrapped myself in George's old flannel robe, the one that still carried a hint of his cedar cologne, and sat by the window, watching Chicago stir awake. The city looked the same, cars honking, lights flickering, but I was different. I wasn't just holding a winning ticket. I was holding a second chance. I didn't tell anyone about the money, not Ethan, not Lydia, not even my old teaching colleague, Marie, who'd call every few weeks to check in. This wasn't something to announce. It was something to build, quietly, intentionally, for me. I took the bus downtown to the lottery office, the ticket in a plastic sleeve inside my purse, my hand checking it every few minutes like it might vanish. The receptionist barely glanced up, but when I handed over the ticket, the room shifted. People appeared, offering water, ushering me into an office with a view of the skyline. I signed papers, showed my ID, answered questions about taxes and lump sums. One chose the lump sum, no hesitation. When it was done, I stepped outside, the spring air cooled against my face, and felt something settle in my chest. Not just relief, freedom. I opened a new bank account, hired a financial advisor named Clara, a kind woman who spoke to me like I had options, not like an old lady who'd stumbled into luck. We planned a modest withdrawal schedule, set up international transfers, and created a private trust. I updated my will, something I hadn't touched since George's death. Ethan's name, once central, was removed. In its place, I named Amelia and Jacob, with conditions. They'd access the funds at 25, only if they'd finished their education, shown financial independence, and done a selfless act for someone without expecting reward. I smiled as I wrote that last part. If I was leaving a legacy, it wouldn't be a handout, it would be a lesson. With Clara's help, I started planning my move. Not to a retirement community with bingo nights, but to Provence, France. George and I had dreamed of it, lying in bed on quiet nights, talking about lavender fields and stone villages. "We'll rent a little house," he'd say, "and you'll paint while I nap in the sun." I'd laugh, thinking it was a fantasy. But now, it was possible. I found a rental online, a small cottage with ivy-covered walls and a garden bursting with lavender. I booked it, bought a red leather suitcase that felt bold, and renewed my passport. I didn't post about it on Facebook or tell the neighbors. I wanted this to be mine, untainted by anyone else's expectations. I sold my old car, canceled subscriptions, donated clothes. Ethan had once teased me about frumpy cardigans, he'd called them. I gave away the pots I'd used to cook his favorite chili, dropped Jacob's forgotten toys at a shelter. With every item I let go, I felt lighter, not just in possessions, but in memory. I was shedding the woman who'd nodded, who'd apologized, who'd begged for scraps of love. I wrote letters to Amelia and Jacob, not to send now, but for later, when they were old enough to understand. Stories of who I was, of the love I'd poured into them, of the world I hoped they'd find. I sealed each one, tucked them into the trust file, and felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. When I zipped up that red suitcase and left the apartment for the last time, I didn't look back. Ethan didn't come to say goodbye. He texted instead, "Hope you settle in okay, Mom, we'll call soon." I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because something in me was rising, something he'd never seen, maybe he never would. Provence was everything I'd imagined and more. The cottage was small but perfect, with creaky wooden floors and windows that opened to fields of purple lavender swaying in the breeze. The air smelled of herbs and sunlight, and the mornings were so quiet I could hear my own thoughts again. I unpacked slowly, hanging a few dresses in the wardrobe, setting out a sketchbook I'd bought on impulse at the airport. I didn't know where to start, so I started small. I walked to the village market, where stalls overflowed with tomatoes, cheeses, and flowers. I bought a loaf of crusty bread, a jar of honey, and smiled at the vendor, who called me Madame with a nod. It was the first time in months I'd felt seen. I joined a pottery class, taught by a woman named Elise, who wore linen scarves and laughed like she'd never known sorrow. My hands, once steady guiding children's crayons, fumbled with the clay at first, but Elise was patient. "It's not about perfection," she said. "It's about feeling the earth, letting it speak through you." I made lopsided bowls, cups with uneven rims, and loved every one. I started writing again, not lesson plans or grocery lists, but stories, memories of my childhood, dreams I'd tucked away, moments with George that still made my heart ache. I'd sit in the garden at dusk, a glass of wine in hand, and write until the stars came out. I read 2 novels, poetry, cookbooks, in French I could barely understand, but tried anyway. I learned phrases, bonjour, merci, s'il vous plaît, practiced them at the cafe down the road, where I'd sit with an espresso and watch the world go by. Old men played cards, children chased pigeons, couples argued and laughed. I was part of it, not central, but present, alive. And that was enough. Ethan tried to reach me. First, a text, "You okay, Mom?" Then a missed call, a voicemail, "The kids miss you. Can we talk?" I let them sit, unread, unanswered, not to hurt him, but because I didn't need to fill the silence anymore. For years, I'd been the one reaching out, waiting, hoping for a scrap of acknowledgement. Now, he was the one in the dark, and I was the one choosing when or if to respond. It wasn't anger, it was power, the quiet kind, the kind you don't notice until it's yours. One afternoon, my lawyer, Mr. Harper, called from Chicago. "Your son contacted my office," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "He's concerned, wants to know where you are." I laughed, a soft sound, sipping tea in my garden. "Tell him I'm safe," I said. "Tell him I'm happy, and tell him any communication goes through you." Mr. Harper paused. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm sure," I said, watching a butterfly land on a lavender sprig. Let the silence speak. Ethan's messages kept coming. "The kids ask about you. Are you okay, Mom? Please." I read them sometimes, smiled at the thought of Amelia and Jacob, but didn't reply. I wasn't punishing him. I was building something new, something that didn't bend to his needs. I was learning to be Vivian, not Mom, not Grandma, not the woman who said yes even when it broke her. I was learning to be whole, and in that wholeness, I found peace. Not the kind that comes from apologies or reconciliation, but the kind you earn by choosing yourself, by waking up each day and saying, "This is mine." I didn't know then that Ethan would push further, that he'd try to take this peace from me. I didn't know I'd have to fight to keep it, but I was ready, because the woman who'd left Chicago wasn't coming back, and the woman I was becoming, she wasn't going anywhere. Life in Provence had a rhythm, like a song I was learning to hum. Each morning, I'd wake to the soft chirp of birds and the scent of lavender drifting through my open window. I'd walk to the village, my red leather bag slung over my shoulder, and buy fresh figs or a warm baguette from the market. I'd spend afternoons in Elise's pottery studio, my hands shaping clay into bowls that were never perfect, but always mine. I was 62, and for the first time in decades, I wasn't living for anyone else. I was living for me. And that, I thought, was the end of the story. But Ethan, my son, had other plans. His messages had grown more frequent, piling up on my phone, like leaves in autumn. "Mom, where are you? The kids miss you. Can we talk?" I'd read them, sometimes late at night, the glow of my screen cutting through the dark. I'd smile at the thought of Amelia and Jacob, their little faces bright in my memory, but I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to hurt Ethan, but because I'd learned something in the quiet of Provence. Silence wasn't just absence, it was a choice, a boundary, a way of saying, "I'm not who I was, and I don't owe you my peace." I thought he'd give up, that he'd accept my absence the way he'd accepted my presence without much thought. But I underestimated him. Ethan wasn't one to let go, not when he sensed something slipping out of his control. It was a warm June afternoon when the first sign came. I was sitting in my garden, sketching a lopsided vase I'd made in class, when my phone buzzed with an email from Mr. Harper, my lawyer back in Chicago. The subject line was simple: urgent, contact, attempt. I opened it, my heart already sinking, knowing it wouldn't be good news. "Vivian," the email read, "your son has reached out through a third party, a journalist named Daniel Carter. He's published an article in a local Chicago paper, claiming you've abandoned your family and are squandering a sudden windfall. Ethan's behind it, though he's not named directly. I suspect he's trying to pressure you to return or gain access to your finances. I've attached the article. Please advise how you'd like to proceed." I sat back, the sketchbook sliding from my lap. The air felt heavy, the sweetness suddenly cloying. I opened the attachment, my fingers trembling. The headline was bold: "Accusing grandmother disappears, leaving family in the lurch." The article painted me as a selfish woman who'd won a fortune and fled. leaving her son and grandchildren without a word. It quoted a family source saying I'd changed overnight, that I was living lavishly while my family struggled. There was even a line about how the kids cried for their grandma, as if I'd walked away without a backward glance. I read it twice, my chest tight, my ears ringing. This wasn't just a lie. It was a betrayal. Sharper than Ethan's words in the kitchen, deeper than his dismissal at the barbecue. He hadn't just pushed me out. He was trying to rewrite my story, to make me the villain, in a life I'd spent years holding together. I thought of Amelia and Jacob, their innocent faces, and wondered what he'd told them, that I'd left because I didn't care, that I'd chosen money over love. The thought made my stomach twist. I could have called him, I could have sent an angry email, demanded an explanation. But I'd spent too many years reacting, appeasing, trying to fit into the space he allowed me. This time, I wouldn't. I set the phone down, walked to the edge of the garden, and let the breeze cool my face. I wasn't that woman anymore, the one who nodded, who apologized, who begged to be seen. I was Vivian, and I had a voice. And this time, I'd use it. I called Mr. Harper. "Don't respond yet," I said, my voice steady. "I need to think." Then I reached out to Elise, my pottery teacher, who'd become a friend. She'd once mentioned a cousin in publishing, a woman who worked for a small but respected magazine in Paris. Could I meet her? I asked. Elise didn't hesitate. "Of course, Viv, what's this about?" I told her. "Not everything, but enough. The article, the lies, the son who thought he could shame me into returning." Elise's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "Write your truth," she said. "Let the world hear it." I spent the next 3 days writing. Not a letter to Ethan, not a defense, but my story. I wrote about the years I'd given teaching children to read, raising Ethan through lean times, holding Amelia and Jacob when their parents were too busy. I wrote about the kitchen, the moment he called me too old, the way his words cut deeper than any knife. I wrote about the loneliness of that Chicago apartment, the ticket that changed everything, the lavender fields that taught me I was still alive. I wrote about choosing myself, not out of selfishness, but because I'd learned that love shouldn't mean erasure. Elise's cousin, Margot, met me at a cafe in Aix-en-Provence. She read my draft, her eyes bright with tears by the end. "Is powerful," she said. "It's not just your story. It's for anyone who's ever felt invisible." She published it in her magazine, with a simple title, "The Woman Who Chose Herself." Within days, it spread. Readers shared it online, left comments about their own struggles with family, with being overlooked, with finding their way back to themselves. Strangers sent me letters, thanking me for reminding them they weren't alone. Women my age, younger, older, all saying the same thing: "Your story is mine." Ethan's article, the one meant to shame me, faded into the background. The journalist issued a retraction, citing unverified sources. Mr. Harper sent me a follow-up. Ethan had called his office, stunned, asking to speak to me. "He didn't expect this," Mr. Harper said, a chuckle in his voice. "He thought you'd come running back." I smiled, picturing Ethan's face, the realization that his plan had backfired. He'd wanted to control the narrative, to paint me as the one who'd failed, but I'd taken the pen, and I'd written my own ending. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't in proving him wrong. It was in proving myself right. I'd spent years believing my worth came from what I gave others: my time, my love, my energy. But in Provence, in the quiet of my garden, in the words I'd poured onto the page, I'd found something better. A truth that no one, not even my son, could take away. I was enough. Not because I was needed, but because I was me. I stood in my cottage that evening, looking out at the lavender fields, the sun dipping low, casting a golden glow over the world. I held a cup of tea, the steam curling in the air, and felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. Ethan could keep reaching, keep scheming, but he couldn't touch this. Not anymore. And as the stars began to peek through the twilight, I knew the hardest part was still ahead: not fighting Ethan, but deciding if I'd let him back in, not as the mother he'd dismissed, but as the woman I'd become. The lavender fields were golden under the September sun, their scent mingling with the earthiness of my latest pottery project, a small vase, still drying on the table in my garden. I was sketching its curves, my pencil moving slowly, when the postman arrived. He handed me a cream-colored envelope, no return address, just my name in a child's wobbly scrawl. I smiled, tracing the letters. already knowing who it was from. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and opened it with a butter knife, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a drawing, vibrant and chaotic, crayons bleeding into each other, a yellow house with a red roof, a sun with spiky rays, 3 stick figures in the yard, one tall, one small, and one with gray hair and a triangle skirt. Above them, in Amelia's careful printing, were the words, "We miss you, Grandma." Jacob had signed his name, a wobbly J taking up half the page. I traced their little hearts, my throat tightening. Tucked behind the drawing was a note in Ethan's precise handwriting. "Mom," it read, "I didn't tell the kids why you left. I said you were on an adventure. They ask about you every day. I wasn't sure if you'd want this, but they insisted. I hope it finds you. Ethan. I read it again, then a third time, sitting in the quiet of my cottage. There was no apology, not yet, but there was something new, a softness, a hint of regret. For the first time in a long time, I felt a stir of tenderness, not for Ethan, but for Amelia and Jacob, who loved me without conditions, without knowing the weight of their father's words. I set the drawing on the mantel, beside a photo of George and me, and pulled out my notebook. "Dear Amelia and Jacob," I wrote. "Your drawing made my heart sing. I love the gray hair you gave Mitts just right. I'm in a place full of flowers and sunshine, making things with clay, and thinking of you every day. Amelia, I still read your favorite mouse story. Jacob, I bet you're the fastest on your soccer team. Be kind, be brave, and know your grandma loves you more than all the stars in the sky." I enclosed 2 small pottery beads I'd made, one blue for Amelia, one green for Jacob, and mailed it to their school, using a post office box in Provence. I didn't include my number or email, not yet. They deserved my love, but Ethan would have to earn his way back. A week later, another letter came, this one from Ethan alone. I opened it at the cafe near the village square, an espresso cooling beside me. "Mom," he wrote, "I read your letter to the kids. They haven't stopped talking about your beads. Thank you. I've messed up, more than I can say. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to try to make things right. Not as your son who took you for granted, but as someone who sees you now. I'd like to visit, if you'll let me. Just for a coffee, an hour, anything you're willing to give." His words were careful, raw, the first time I'd heard him sound human in years. I didn't cry, not because it didn't move me, but because I didn't need his words to validate me anymore. I'd built a life here, in the clay under my nails, the pages of my notebook, the laughter of new friends at the market. I'd healed, not because Ethan had apologized, but because I'd stopped waiting for permission to live. Still, his letter was a door, cracked open just enough to let light through. I didn't rush to answer. I sipped my espresso, watched children chase pigeons across the square, and let the moment breathe. A week later, I wrote back. "Ethan," I said, "you may come as my guest. Bring only kindness. Leave expectations behind. Vivian." I didn't invite him fully into my world, but I left room for him to knock. Not as the son who'd dismissed me, but as a man who might learn to see me. Reconnection, if it happened, would be slow, built on respect, not obligation. This time, I wouldn't carry the weight alone. That evening, I sat at my favorite cafe near the village church, a sketchbook open. The air warm with the scent of roasted chestnuts. The sun dipped behind the stone buildings, casting a soft glow over the world. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't hoping for a call or a text. I was simply here, alive in a way I hadn't been in years. George would have loved this, I thought, picturing his smile, the way he'd have raised a glass to the sky. I'd spent my life believing worth came from being needed by students, by Ethan, by Amelia, and Jacob. I'd thought love meant giving until there was nothing left of me. But Provence taught me otherwise. The lottery ticket wasn't the miracle. It was the mirror, showing me a woman I'd forgotten, vibrant, curious, worthy of her own dreams. I'd unearthed her, one pottery bowl, one market walk, one quiet morning at a time. And in that unearthing, I found peace. To anyone listening, here's what I've learned. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage isn't staying, isn't fighting, isn't proving your worth to those who overlook you. It's walking away, not with anger, but with grace. It's building a life so full, so rich, that the people who once dismissed you must stand outside, wondering how you bloomed without them. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standards. I didn't slam the door. I opened one for myself, and in choosing myself, I found the truest kind of love, the kind that starts within. As the cafe lights twinkled on, I turned to a fresh page in my sketchbook and began to draw. Not a memory, not a person, but the outline of the church spire against the fading sky, the world alive with possibility, my world, my home, and for the first time, it was enough.